Now, to some accountability that we will always be talking about here. One of the biggest issues about why Melbourne is where it is, and one of the biggest problems that is going to face the rest of the country, are people who are refusing to get coronavirus tests. Yesterday, you saw how angry I got about the failure of the New South Wales health system to adequately screen people who were coming off a domestic flight, a flight which was a Jetstar flight which took place between Melbourne and Sydney on Tuesday night. As I told you, there is just one exit that everyone who flies into the domestic airport, regardless of what airline you go with, go through before eventually you go down to collect your bag or you leave the airport. This one place means that it is impossible not to be put through some sort of screening, not to have your temperature checked. Well, today the Jetstar CEO came out saying that after a plane load of people on his airline were not tested, that this is not the beginning of another Ruby Princess.
It's a completely different set of circumstances. It's a completely different set of circumstances, a completely different risk profile.
But important to note that virtually nothing has been said today as follow-up via press conferences by the Chief Medical Officer or anyone from New South Wales Health, because as we told you, there is about 40 people who may well have a question mark over them at the moment because they were in the areas of close contact of most concern, rows 1 through 4 on that particular flight. Yet the words were hollow from a bureaucrat.
There was an issue at the airport where passengers were disembarked when the health screening team were screening another airline. The airport have now put in protocols to ensure that the health teams are there and are able to do the screening, and no one's allowed to disembark before that happens.
But the issue is that someone who was able to leave, who eventually was contacted by the Department of Health in New South Wales, has refused to do a coronavirus test. 3 of the 38 passengers have been referred to police, including one person who has refused to be health screened. People who refuse to get coronavirus tests are not just arrogant, but they put the rest of us at danger. One of the unspoken things that was a major reason why Victoria got where it is tonight and why Melbourne is under lockdown for the next 6 weeks is because up to 10,000 people in Melbourne were refusing to get a test, refusing to do so. And even in those Housing Commission towers in Melbourne, we learned today that not everyone inside those Housing Commission towers is doing tests. In fact, about 15% haven't been tested or are refusing to be tested.
Look, we've got an 85% success rate. People are being re-offered it today in terms of testing. Might have been people weren't there, they didn't answer the door. That's been a bit of an issue around language, so that's happening again. If people don't accept the test, they will have to continue to quarantine until the 14 days is up.
But the quarantining is going to be happening inside the buildings that the federal or the Victorian Chief Medical Officer has referred to as vertical cruise ships. That means, of course, they stay in an area where apparently 10% of people in those affected buildings, and the most worrying building, have coronavirus. So supposedly they're going to stay there with the circulating air, with the collective surfaces and all the rest of it. This can't be acceptable. We also tried to get information, direct information, from New South Wales about how many people have refused to do tests there. They gave us a vague answer. Yesterday, or rather, so far, all year, there have been 979,000 tests which have been done in New South Wales. New South Wales Health tell us today that about 2% of people are refusing to get a test. Now, whether that has been through the whole time or just the past month or so, again, they won't say. But put simply, 2% of the 979,000 people who have been tested, and therefore a 2% number on top of that are refusing to get tested, could be as many as almost 20,000 people. We're talking about 9,580 people who may well have refused a test in New South Wales. The consequences of which is that we don't know if they have the virus as they go back into an area that doesn't have the same restrictions where currently they exist in Melbourne or in previously locked down suburbs. So could somebody answer me this question? You can't refuse a breath test when a police officer pulls you over to the side of the road. If you do, they take your licence away from you. So how is it that anyone can refuse a coronavirus test? If you refuse that coronavirus test, you should be immediately taken to the nearest quarantine hotel and you shouldn't be allowed to leave for at least 14 days. This is the rule that must be put in place. Supposedly, Victoria's Bill of Rights is the legal reason as to why people are allowed to get away with refusing to take a test. That's not the case in New South Wales, Queensland, WA or anywhere else in the country. There should be maximum enforcement of those who refuse to take a test. It only takes 5 minutes, sure, it's not comfortable. But being locked in your house for the next 6 weeks, like is the case currently in Melbourne, is a whole lot more uncomfortable. It is your civic duty to take a test. If you think you have coronavirus, then you have to get the test. If authorities think that you need to be tested because you may well have had contact with somebody who could have had the virus, you have to be tested. If you don't, you must be taken that very second to a place where you can be kept away from everyone else for the next 14 days. And that place shouldn't be your home.